Yeah, thank you, CCN, for hosting me. It's really wonderful to be here with you. I really appreciate you taking the time on a Sunday. For some of you, a little earlier, like myself, and for others, quite late. And yeah, just really grateful we can come together on this topic. I think it's such an important area for us to bring our practice and our Dharma and our understanding more deeply. It's such such a wonderful paradox to be in the natural world and loving the natural world. As I know you are all aware, I got to watch and finish David Attenborough's witness statement last night. Other folks have seen that. It's essentially him reflecting on his last 50 years plus of being in the natural world. And it is a love story to the natural world, and it is a impassioned plea, and it just holding both of those. So in our time here together, my plan is for us to start with actually tuning into and becoming aware of the maybe more difficult or distressing emotions that we hold around our ecological distress, the reality of what's going on in our world in terms of global warming and the myriad effects of that from many places where we all live. And so we're going to meet that with friendliness. And some of you may be familiar with the handshake practice. It's a practice we've happily started to use in cultivating emotional balance for the last about 10 years, based on Tsoknyi Rinpoche's teaching of how to bring our kind attention and awareness to difficult emotions in the body, and a really interesting stance that we'll go into of how we do that meditation. Then we'll shift a bit and really examine and lean into the experience of gratitude and awe and rejoicing in the natural world, which is also another part of what it means to be alive on this planet, to be connecting to the more than natural world. And then we will, hopefully, as best we can, try and take a stance of holding both, of having a balance around both those feelings of distress and uncertainty, as well as awe, gratitude, appreciation, and finding that equanimity, that ability to be with both and hold both together. So that is going to be our plan today. We're going to do 3 practices and have a bit of time for discussion as well. So that's hopefully going to really meet you all in what you're needing on this Sunday. And for those who are watching later and recording, yeah, think of it as an opportunity to do quite a bit of practice and reflection. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started with just a bit of a grounding practice. And yeah, again, just expressing my appreciation for being here with you all and being here on this such an important and beautiful topic. So let's begin by really feeling that wonderful sense of grounding, as so many of us do in our meditation, by sensing our feet on the floor. Maybe there's a lucky one of us who's watching this recording live or in the future who's actually in the outside world, but for many of us, we're placing our feet on the ground. And we're going to have to engage with our imagination to feel the sense of earth beneath the floor. Maybe we can even imagine whether it's going down one story beneath the home that we are in or a couple stories. Some of us could be in a skyscraper 25 floors above the earth, and yet we can still imagine that beneath that there is that earth, that rich and fertile place and space which is always holding us. The earth will hold us if we are coming with joy or if we're coming with uncertainty. The earth will hold us if we feel doubt and if we feel fear. So taking a moment, and as we sense this ground of the earth beneath us, invite ourselves to just fully release and let go whatever we can let go of that will allow us to be more fully here in this present moment. And bringing our awareness and attention further into the body, feeling the gentle flow of breath through the body. And as we attend to the breath, we do so with awareness of the breath from within the body itself, feeling this entire body breathing. And then taking a moment and again moving more to imagination, visualization, considering the space around you. Of course, the immediate space of whatever location we are in, maybe windows and walls, ceiling above or a roof. And then extending this visualization and imagination of our physical space and considering at this moment, what might the sky look like above us? Are there clouds? Is it clear? Might there be the nighttime stars or the sun? And feel and imagine that sense of spaciousness and openness above us. A sky which also always there, whether it's obscured by clouds and storms or wide open, inviting that quality of spaciousness and openness. And for a couple more breaths here, just really feeling into the present moment and the ways that this present moment can be connected to the natural world, the ground which is beneath us, the sky which is above us. And for those of us in certain parts of the world, we can recognize that the land where we are sitting on has been inhabited for hundreds and thousands of years. Here in Northern California, the Ohlone and Miwok tribes walked and guardianed this land beautifully, living in harmony with nature, and still bring forth those traditions today. And considering if you know or are aware of maybe some of the earlier traditions of the land where you sit upon, recognizing that this feeling of connection to the earth, to the sky, to all the elements. So fundamentally part of humanity, and part of a spiritual practice. And taking just a couple more breaths here, releasing any reflection or inquiry, and just feeling our body, gently breathing. Thank you. Thank you for your practice. It's yeah, always such a joy to get to practice together, and even virtually, I can really feel and many familiar faces. So wonderful to see many of you, and for those who are choosing to be off camera, I support that. I hope you are really enjoying and sinking in with what feels good for you today. It's so important when we are taking extra time to receive teachings that we can give ourselves what we need. And after many years now of the pandemic, I think all of us have gotten a good sense of when it makes sense for us to show up visually and visibly, and when it makes sense for us to, have the screen off and take time inwards. So I appreciate those I can see and can't see. And I want to move us a little bit towards, yeah, reflecting on this handshake practice. Before we do, is there anyone in the chat who would like to share anything they noticed about that practice? Anything they want to highlight of just bringing a little bit more of the natural world into our grounding practice? I remember Tempa and I taking a beautiful walk in the Berkeley Hills a number of years ago now, and talking about how much it makes sense to bring the natural world into our contemplative practice. It's so natural. Of course, there are already many ways in which we hold the elements in our practice. We bring them to mind, we use them as inspirations or even focus of our attention. And it's yet such an interesting turn to kind of really draw in a sense of place in this moment, where we physically are, and to recognize that wherever we are, there is that sense of the natural world. And I think it can be quite powerful to invite that in for our practice and help us feel that sense of ground. I have been working with my meditation, my weekly meditation group. We've been reading The Old Path, White Clouds, which is a biography of the Buddha compiled by Thich Nhat Hanh. Some of you may be familiar with it, and I've read it many times. It's so wonderful to read in a group setting right now. And one thing that's really struck me in the book, in reading it this time, is how profoundly essential the role of the natural world is in Buddha's waking up. And not only actually in the waking up, but throughout the process. Of course, needless to say, he's there beneath what was a pipala tree, but then becomes the Bodhi tree. But also when he is able to finally extract himself from the palace and all the worldly obligations, the first passage for him into a true life of a contemplative is by having his feet on the earth. No longer having a beautiful horse, no longer having all these other vestments, but really having his feet on the earth, and the forest becoming really an essential part of his teachings, how he is moving through the world. And when he becomes, the leader of so many Monks throughout the land, they are never taking carriages. They're always just walking. They're always making their way across the earth. And there's just so much connection to the natural world throughout. And even the early realizations of the young Buddha, sitting beneath the rose apple tree and recognizing and seeing that even all the prayers that are used for celebrations, in this case, it's a pre harvest celebration, that the prayers alone can't actually help and support and meet the need of the suffering world, as evidenced by all the tiny little worms in the earth that are torn apart by the plows of this harvest ceremony. So just really interesting to think about how the natural world is such a essential part and component of the earliest practices in Buddhism. And then today, what I want us to also consider is how do we meet this sense of ecological distress with our practice? So we can bring this ground in, we can kind of have a sense of the natural world that can help us at least feel a little more connected and engaged. But I want to also talk about some of the difficult emotions we feel around our ecological distress. There's been now quite a bit of research that has looked at the increasing amount of people reporting that ecological distress is among the primary stresses. There are a lot to choose from in our world, right? Needless to say, wars and natural disasters, inequalities. And then, of course, in the home front, all of us have our people that we're concerned about on a day-to-day basis. But this looming sense of ecological distress is really, intensifying. And with ecological distress, there can be a whole variety of emotions. We can feel fear, anxiety, worry. What is going to happen? What will be our quality of life for kids and grandkids, for next generations, even for ourselves? There can be a sense of true despair. So with fear, really, there's a sense of threat, like what's going to happen. And when we think about fear, there's a quality that is kind of, agitated. And it's often called a low arousal emotion, but it can be a very high arousal emotion. Low arousal meaning it can be kind of on the back burner, like simmering, like just that worry. It can also be those kind of pangs, those bright feelings, maybe that sense when we wake up in the night with concern or worry, or we read a specific headline about some part of the forest in the Amazon that once again is reaching a tipping point, and we have that real intense feeling of fear. But that's different than despair. Despair, which is a lot closer to sadness. And sadness almost always is a kind of low energy emotion, one in which it's very hard for us to feel motivated. And in fact, what we really want is comfort. That's what our sadness is really seeking. And often it's accompanied by a sense of hopelessness, not feeling like there's anything we can do. Kind of a different energetic quality. I hope you can sense that even as I'm describing it. Another very reasonable emotion that many of us feel is anger and frustration. Why are we not doing more? Why does it seem that those in power maybe not be doing enough? Why are there less kind of teeth to these large UN agreements than maybe we feel there should be? Why are we so short-sighted in what we're doing? And that anger, altogether a different energy. That anger is like hot and bright, and as there's been much discussion in contemplative science, that anger can be really constructive and helpful, motivating us to take action, and be very corrosive and very harmful. Not only if we kind of are expelling it upon someone else, but just internally to sit with that anger. And so I'm very curious from folks as you're hearing about feelings of fear, despair, and anger. I would love in the chat, or if folks feel willing and interested to raise their hand, which of those is really resonant with you when you think about your feelings of concern or distress around the environment? Of course, there could be more than one, but I'm curious, is there like a go-to? Is there like underlying feeling of one of those emotions that seems more prominent when we think about the destruction and devastation in our world. Yes, Victoria, I think we'll unmute you, maybe.
There, now I'm unmuted. Thank
So
you.
much.
It's really wonderful to see you again. Yeah, I feel a profound sadness because from earliest childhood, I always was fascinated by all the sort of the great monuments of nature, like the glaciers and the
Mm,
big icebergs and things like that. And I haven't seen those in the flesh. And now the sense that the world as I knew about it and imagined it since childhood is quickly disappearing.
mm,
And this and the kind of despair, like no one seems to care. So I think that then moves into the anger. But for me, it's more sadness, a kind of like a lost world. Um,
yeah.
so thank you.
Yeah. And can I ask, when you have it, do you know, or can you kind of recall, like, where do you feel it in your body?
A kind of heartache, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah.
Just a
Yeah.
sense of kind of and it does feel like when you're talking about the energy, that was really interesting because it does feel like a kind of a certain giving up. Yeah, it goes into a low energy, which is then it sort of increases, then it goes, it's kind of like in a circle, like it then increases the sadness.
Hmm.
Um, and it's hard for me to sit with it. I tend to embrace the nature that is right at my fingertips. Like right now, I have birds outside my window that are repairing an old nest from last year, getting ready for their springtime activities. And so I try to like turn my attention away from these distant, like the glaciers that are going away to kind of the immediate, what's still left, what still remains.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I see. And I think, what Victoria is also pointing out, and we will talk about these throughout, are, what are our strategies, right? So when we think about classic strategies to regulate emotion, we're often thinking about what can we do before, during, and after. So when we have an emotion arise, it's triggered by a certain experience, and sometimes we can really help out just even at that level of what we perceive to be a trigger. That can be, really infusing or saturating our mind with compassion and all the other immeasurable practices so that when something arises, we just have a readiness, right? A stance of compassion or loving kindness or rejoicing, equanimity. There's what we can do in the moment when we feel that sense, whether it's heartache or like clenching. What are the practice we can do in the moment? And that's the handshake practice, which we will do together in a little bit. And then there are the strategies that we can do when we are aware of the emotion, when we're actually experiencing and have responded. And by response, it doesn't mean we're actually doing anything. It doesn't necessarily mean a behavior. It can be realizing that we are, in this sense of despair and really like feeling that low energy. And we can apply a strategy there. That could be a strategy, as Victoria is describing, as kind of a positive distraction. Like, wow, this is really huge. Let's go to something right here, right now that's beautiful and focus there. And it's interesting because so much of the work I have done around emotion regulation strategies is for emotions that come and go, about things that are always changing, right? So, a difficult experience at work, but then it changes. A difficult phase in our relationship, but changes. And yet, when it comes to the climate, this is not something that is changing, right? And so the regulation strategies, they're different. They look like the ones we'd use for something temporary, but there's a whole different way of approaching it. And I think it's really interesting of how, in some ways, do we build like this ongoing flexibility emotionally around the experiences we're having, not just a one-time response to a difficult experience of something that's come up in our life, but ongoing. And I'm seeing here some really great descriptions in the chat. Um, so existential dread, and the low arousal dread there, yeah, like Vanessa's describing that kind of fear that's in the background. And I think sometimes with that dread, it's as though we might be inadvertently shifting our gaze away from it internally. So there are things we can do literally, like Victoria described, of looking at the birds, but we can kind of internally shift our gaze away, not meeting our emotion. And that's very helpful and very functional a lot of the times when we don't want to go all the way down into an experience. And yet I think sometimes it makes sense for us to really meet the experience, to really see it and bring our mindfulness to it so fully. From the reading this week in Old Path White Clouds is when you bring your mindfulness to anything fully, it really and completely reveals itself. So this idea of like we can bring ourselves so fully into our mindfulness of any emotion that it actually reveals itself as passing and temporary, even if the trigger to it isn't. Hopelessness, I think very reasonable from Hugh. Despair and powerlessness from Jen. Trepidation, which is a really nice, kind of low level description, like a low level fear description. Despair, fear and worry. Root chakra, loss of safety. So yeah, where in the body we're feeling it. And then Wendy, the frustration that it really doesn't need to be this way. And then frustration maybe leading to despair or anger. Sadness, despair, hopelessness from Diego. So I think we can see that there's, there can be a cycle with these as well, that, very often sadness and despair, it's such a low power emotion, meaning we don't feel like we have that much energy. And it's almost as though we just can't abide there any longer and we are just angry. And that might push us towards some kind of action. So interesting how these emotions can work together and how we can observe how they work together at different times. I think I saw a hand. Was that you, David? Did you have a comment there? Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hi. I was just thinking about the variety of experiences that we have and how, in a way, it's important to maintain that variety if we can, rather than kind of slipping into a more permanent reaction to things, because we can get kind of very stuck if we do that.
Mm-hmm.
Aware that, it's kind of watching the news, for example, the emotional reactions are many and varied to the kind of variety of different stories. But that's important to recognize in the moment that that's what my experience actually is. And for me to then think, okay, what am I going to do about that? What is either my antidote, because there's nothing I can do at the moment, or what action can I take?
Yeah.
So I was kind of feeling it's important to maintain that variety as opposed to just kind of sink down into one constant thing.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that maybe the variety. Oh, my more than human world pet here is joining us for a
Yeah,
moment.
cool.
There we go. Um, I think it's interesting that the variety. I mean, I think definitely it actually, even when we have that low level dread, trepidation, and hopelessness, we can get so familiar with that feeling that it's like the water we swim in, we're not aware of it, and that we can become in some ways apathetic. And it is, I think we don't want to be apathetic, but we don't want to be constantly at a state of over arousal either. And so it's a very interesting prospect of how can we be with a trigger to our emotion, which is just so prevalent and profound, which is so always there. In some ways, it is like thinking about our death and mortality, which also always there, ever present, not going away. There's no way out. And yet, if we think about it and obsess on it in a specific way, we couldn't do anything, right? There's just no way. And in fact, when we look closely at it, it can help us clarify and motivate us to what is really important and matters. And I think it's interesting to think about, I think especially with, the climate catastrophe, as Wendy was saying, part of it is this feeling of it doesn't have to be this way. With our own mortality, most of us, hopefully, we realize like it has to be this way, right? There isn't another way. There are some people who are trying to extend life forever, and I wish them the best of luck, but that's not really the contract here on this planet, in this body. And so I do think, being aware of and paying attention to our frustration. The frustration again can be so helpful because it makes us think like there needs to be a different way. But the frustration can also give us like a false sense of control, as though there's something, that we could or should or would be doing at any time. And we see this a lot in the burnout of in the activist movement. We see this a lot in the burnout of healthcare providers. I've really been super fortunate to be working with healthcare providers for about the last 10 years, and myself was a frontline provider also. And that experience of recognizing you can't actually alleviate all the suffering is so humbling, and so difficult. And it still requires that sometimes you get, that righteous indignation, of it shouldn't be this way. We shouldn't treat our patients this way. We need more resources. We need more referrals. But knowing the line and the difference between wanting and needing it to be different, and using that anger as power, and then getting into almost like a trough of anger where we're just angry and there's just a lot of blame. And it's interesting because I think it's a very, we have to almost fall into it to know the difference between that and a more constructive form of our anger, which motivates and inspires us to change. So, yeah, thank you, David, for sharing. Any other questions on this topic before we start moving our way towards a practice of handshake with our emotions and distress? Part of this, and I'm sorry but not sorry, part of this discussion is to kind of get us actually into a direct experience of our emotion with the natural world. So we can't really shake hands with our emotion if we aren't able to access and feel our emotion. So really wanting you all to be thinking about and feeling into what is it like when you face, and it's just, again, with the footage we see, it's just so heartbreaking to see these incredibly and magnificent animals losing their habitats. It is just astounding, and I think a lot of emotions can be evoked in that way if we bring our mind to it. And could also be, for me here in Northern California, we had a couple weeks in the beginning of the year when there was so much rain that it overwhelmed our sewer system, and the ocean was flooded with human waste, among other things. And I am an avid lover of the ocean, and to actually not be able to be in the ocean because it was so polluted, it literally was my nightmare come true, that we would reach a state at which that was the everyday, that we are no longer able to enjoy this truly perfect paradise of the world that we live in. So I'm giving us a bit of evocative material here so that we can move it into the handshake practice. Any other questions or reflections on what it's like to bring this material to the front? Maybe some of you have opportunities to talk about it. Maybe for others, there's not that often in which you engage or talk about this openly. And here we are with an opportunity to do so. Maybe I'm bringing too much despair. Too hard to reflect. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's hard to, yeah, it's really hard to willingly engage in this topic, I would say. Yeah. Well, I will move us on to the handshake practice, which I think David brought up the word antidote, and I do like that word. I think when I'm trying to understand what we know from the contemporary science and contemplative science of emotion, I don't ever want us to have a sense that emotions are something we're trying to get rid of. I think that's not a accurate or helpful view. Emotions have an incredible amount of energy that we'd like to transmute. Emotions often have a really meaningful message for us. It's important. And emotions, they really, they can be such a great ally in understanding our deeper needs, desires, and wants. However, what we would most like is to be able to extend our response to our emotion in a constructive way, and really worthwhile to respond to our emotions in a healthy way. I think it's interesting to when we're holding these emotions with the natural world and the catastrophe of the natural world, how to do that in a constructive way. So if we're not denying and suppressing and avoiding, we probably need to give ourselves time here and there to really just meet and welcome. And the handshake practice, the main premise of the practice is to literally shake hands instead of trying to kind of push our emotion away, to over embrace it, make it okay too quickly, and trying to maybe ignore and pretend it isn't happening. So with the handshake, it's a very simple somatic meeting. We just allow ourselves to experience the emotion in the body, dropping our attention and awareness into the body. And what we can hopefully recognize is that there are these areas of sensation, whether it's as was described earlier, the heartbreak at the chest, or somewhere in the belly, or maybe in the jaw. What we know about the physiology of emotions is there's actually kind of a wave-like form. So we become triggered and our physiology peaks and then it recedes. Very often we intervene before it recedes. So maybe we distract ourselves away or, kind of ignore, and we don't get to see and feel and really, have that experiential knowledge that our emotions arise and fall. And what that experiential knowledge provides us, or it can provide us, is a sense of confidence. Like, it's okay. I can feel this. It won't be here forever. Like, this is a natural experience and feeling, and I can allow its natural course. When we end up feeling emotions for, let's say, hours or days or weeks, we're not allowing the emotion to have its natural wave-like form. Somewhere in between the crest and the fall, we're re-triggering through thought. So instead of allowing and feeling the emotion just coming and going through the body as a natural process, we're kind of reinvigorating it. This is, of course, classically called rumination, as we re-trigger and re-trigger and re-trigger. Our emotion actually only lasts 30 to 90 seconds at a physiological level. So just a single episode of emotion will rise and fall. And in our handshake practice, we'll give ourselves more time, but I'll invite us to turn inward and to connect with whether it is our despair, our anger, our fear, to bring that, kind of like accentuate it, really bring our mindfulness to it, and then to drop the conceptual mind, to drop our thinking about it, to let go of any of the words or ideas, and really feel and sense in the body the experience of the emotion. And we will pay attention to the body and pay attention to the body without an agenda. I love Soknyi Rinpoche always says that, your body and heart and mind know when you're just trying to get away from and avoid the emotion. So if you go in like, okay, I'm ready to be with this emotion as long as it doesn't last very long. I'm ready to be with it as long as we can go to compassion pretty soon. So really, without any expectation, without a judgment, no agenda, to really just be with the emotion and the felt experience in the body as a sense almost of welcoming in, that kind of classic idea of inviting in your demons or inviting in your difficult experiences to tea. So we'll invite those those sensations in because they're already there. And what is it like to make space and room for them? And with the handshake practice, we may start to notice that those sensations start to loosen, and then they become less pronounced. They kind of dissipate. And we may start doing a practice that's more just like a body awareness. There isn't so much of the felt sense, the heavy sense of emotion in our body. For those of you who are familiar, this is a subtle body practice. And for those of you who are not familiar, the subtle body really describes this kind of porousness between our thinking mind and our form or physical body. The contemporary research in stress really gets into this a great deal these days, where we see that our stress gets under the skin. Our stress and our psychological distress actually has an impact on our immunological functioning, a lot of other aspects in the body. And we can sense in our subtle body, that's not just being hungry or tired or having aches or pains. Our subtle body is where we can recognize and feel the truth of the fact that our mind and body are connected. That everything we're experiencing when we're thinking of our mind and emotions is happening in our body. It's a very powerful experience. And not only is handshake a great way to kind of meet our emotions, it's a really amazing strategy to be with some of our heavier emotions as well. So it's an investigation, as well as just a very helpful experience of what might it be like to apply the handshake into our everyday life. What's interesting is Silkney actually developed this practice because he found that so many of his students were really struggling to do basic shamatha, basic focused attention, because so much emotional material was with them when they sat down. When all of us have our very busy, full lives, and God forbid we read the news, there's so much that's happening in our experience as we're sitting down to practice. So the handshake can also be a nice bridge for us to attend to the body, help us kind of relax and calm down, be present, feel that openness and spaciousness. And when the subtle body is open and available, our meditation can be much more stable. So those all of the upsell reasons why we should practice handshake. So let's go ahead and give ourselves a moment to find a good posture. If we're sitting in a chair, really helpful to be upright. This is absolutely a practice you can do lying down if that's best for your body and your energy. And giving ourselves a moment here and again to feel our feet on the floor. Almost imagining the energy of the earth rising up to the bottom and the soles of our feet. Feeling the sense of space around us. In the room we are in, under the sky we are under. Reconnecting to settling our body into its natural state. And to help settle our mind and body, we can allow ourselves to focus through the inhale on inviting a sense of vividness. And as we exhale and release, inviting just that ease throughout the entire exhale. Inhale, inviting a vividness, an uprightness through the spine. And then exhale, relaxing and softening through the front of the body, face, the chest, and the belly. Allow this attention to our breath to help settle the inner speech, the ongoing narrative that we have, judging or distracting. And just see if we can allow the full force of our attention and awareness to follow the breath, inviting the vividness and ease on that undulating rise and fall. Then invite your attention and awareness to really explore the entire field of tactile sensations in the body, as though exploring a completely new territory, noticing where there are areas of lightness or tingling, areas of heaviness or tension. Then we'll shift for a moment away from the body and sensations to the mind and imagination. And just regather your attention towards this concern or consideration around our climate. Maybe there's a word or a phrase, maybe there's images. Allowing yourself to really meet and consider your worries, frustrations. For some of us, we will very quickly start to feel this in our body, and for others, it may take a little longer. Just taking a couple moments here to really bring forth the emotions and feelings in the body by thinking about and making very plain and clear this difficult area. Making sure we're still breathing fully. And then, as much as possible, just releasing, letting go of these thoughts and dropping our attention and awareness fully into the body. And noticing what are the sensations and feelings in the body now. Meeting and shaking hands with whatever is here, this emotional residue in the body. Feel and imagine as though there were enough space for any sensation in the body. And simply keep meeting and feeling without judgment, without expectation, without agenda. Whatever sensations are in the body. The mind may want to revisit that material of thinking and concern, but as much as possible, keep coming back into the body. As you continue noticing sensations in the body, see if that noticing can be kind and welcoming. Again, the sense that there is plenty of space. There is room for all these feelings, that they can arise and unwind and unfold. And continue ventilating the emotion with the breath, allowing the breath and the feeling of the breath through the body to continue making space. And still connecting to that sense of kindness, maybe even curiosity. It's possible that some of the sensations have subsided. We can still sustain and maintain attention moment to moment through the sensations in the body. And start to feel and connect with a sense of wherever there is spaciousness in the body. And even if we still feel residue of the immediate emotional experience, feel or imagine as though you were leaning back in the mind, leaning back in the body, inviting a sense of spacious awareness through the mind, heart, and body. Thank you for your practice. I know some of you probably have done handshake before, but curious if anyone has any questions or thoughts or reflections on kind of shaking hands with meeting that residue of emotion. Were they able to feel the emotion in the body? Was that possible? Okay, see some heads nodding. Did the emotion subside? Oh, Vanessa, hello.
Hello. Yeah, so that was, I think, my first time practicing that, at least with that name or understanding. And it was definitely a very different way of relating and feeling, rather than rejecting or reacting, just allowing and kind of welcoming And I think I got to that place of feeling like the conflict between how we walk on the earth and the things we do to have our own comfort, and that, you know, the effect that it can have. And so it was really powerful for me to just connect with that. I mean, I've intellectually understood that and written about it, but to just let that be, and it felt very comforting to acknowledge it and as such. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, that it's interesting, right? That paradoxically opening towards the difficult emotion can actually feel like that comfort, um, as opposed to the maybe intellectually knowing or maybe just trying to not see or be with. So thank you, Vanessa. Yeah. Anyone else? Tom.
Hi, thanks again for leading us in this practice. We've done this practice before, so I'm familiar with the practice, but I think in the context of the material we're talking about today, it was really interesting for me to kind of really take the instruction of not coming back to the thought to re-engage the bodily somatic experience, and really kind of witnessing that like tendency to want to almost re-engage and it almost in a sense of like re-trigger, because I should feel this more and make it happen more and like keep feeling this way about it, and to let that go and then let it kind of run its course was really powerful this time.
So happy to hear that. Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yes.
When we were kind of, letting it go and resting in awareness, was it possible to kind of feel that sense of more spaciousness after having kind of intensified?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So like, really kind of keying into that spacious quality of the instruction that you gave right after the realization that I would sort of have this tendency to re-trigger. It was like a double reinforcement of just kind of opening up. When I have a tendency to re-trigger it, it's really like a constricting, like wanting to like, hey, like feel this, and then to let that go and then kind of ease into the spaciousness. It's like it continues that momentum of kind of just letting it, just being, I guess is the best way I can put it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's such an interesting part of that practice, and also some may be familiar with the feeding your demons practice, which has a similar approach based in the practice, where you're really meeting what's hard, and then afterwards there is a sense of spaciousness, of having almost kind of directly turned towards and looked at the thing that's been, at your shoulder, asking for your attention, and then you can just relax. So thank you. Is it Karine or Karine?
It's Karine.
Karine.
Yes, Evie, thank you so much for this practice. I've already did the handshake practice, but not connected with nature. And for me, it was really interesting and powerful, this practice, because when I came here, of course, when we connect with topic of nature, we think about climate change, deforestation, and many other issues that we are facing. And I'm facing now, actually, I'm a vegetarian. I became vegetarian 2 years ago, and all my close friends are not. And when I did this practice, I connected with this topic. And I realized doing this handshake practice, I felt more comfortable with that. Okay, maybe somehow a sense of belonging, a sense of it's okay. So was interesting because I'm not connected at all since I came here, and then you mentioned to us, okay, think about an issue, and now I connected with that. So it was really interesting for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, and thanks for that example, right? So we think of these like global, right? Like, why aren't our governments doing more? And then we think of local, like, why are my friends not caring, or whatever we perceive or, experience. And yeah, and it again, it's such an interesting and important message to feel that, and it can be so unhelpful to feel that kind of separation or judgment. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, and I really recommend Sokni has, I think his handshake practice it's definitely online. I think the one that's online is from the Science and Wisdom of Emotion conference, and he gives a beautiful talk, and I can't do it justice today, but he talks a lot about um, inviting in an awareness of emptiness into this practice as well. Just so beautiful. It's very dynamic. I'm gonna have us shift topics a bit. So wanting to make sure if folks want to talk about anything more with handshake, I will absolutely happy to do so. But we're gonna kind of take a little bit. My teaching assistant here is back. Take a little bit of a turn towards awe and gratitude and empathetic joy. So anyone have a last question or comment on handshake? Okay. Yeah, and thank you, Tempa, for putting Sokni and Daniel Goleman just put out a new book together. So there's a number of new podcasts and articles, and then a book. And he really gets into it there. If you're not familiar with Sokni Rinpoche, I have a feeling if you're on, engaging with this material today, that he might be a teacher you find really uh, illuminating and joyful. I feel like he really can bring such joy and heartfulness to our basic human neuroses, which is such a relief because God, it can just get overwhelming. Um, and so we're gonna shift, and I really hope this isn't like doesn't feel like a bypass. Like, okay, we talked about the difficult stuff. Let's feel good. I really think we need to be able to cultivate and harvest pro-social, good, enjoyable feelings in order for us to sustain our emotional balance with not only climate change, but everything in the world. And I think when it comes to the natural world, as Tempa mentioned in the beginning, I feel just so lucky. I've had a very close relationship with the natural world my whole life. I never feel more at home, more at ease, more belonging than in the natural world. That's not true for everyone. That access isn't even available for everyone. And what is so interesting to see in some of the new research, especially in technology, is even a static image of a nature scene increases our well-being. So there's some earlier studies we see in a hospital-based setting where you notice that literally the time of healing for a wound after surgery is increased for the patients whose beds are overlooking a courtyard with a tree in comparison with the patients whose bed window is overlooking another building. So we heal at a physiological level, we recover with even just seeing outside, right? Not necessarily being in. There's a beautiful movement. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it's just bringing very high resolution, beautiful videos into prisons in North America here. And even bringing in the exposure to the natural world to these incarcerated beings who are experiencing incarceration, it increases their well-being. So even that ability to kind of witness nature, just looking at nature, increases our well-being. And interestingly, not any nature. right? There's actually the scenes that evoke the greatest kind of positive affect or enjoyable feelings are the nature environments that have a lot of biodiversity. So definitely not trying to diss the English garden. I love the English garden. It is so beautiful, but there's something about the wild. And my hunch, no one knows, my hunch is when we see the way that everything relates to everything else in the natural world, we can almost see how we relate to that. You know, that ecosystem feel, a sense of everything just kind of, moving within everything else, just like us, right? Like we are part of all these different systems and all these experiences. And it's just such a rejuvenating feeling to witness. And then if we're so fortunate to be immersed in the natural world. So one of my longtime mentors and dear friends, Dacher Keltner, some of you may know, he's the founding director of the Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley, and he runs a lab at Berkeley primarily looking at prosociality. So essentially those qualities which make us kind, empathetic, grateful. And most recently, he just came out with a book a couple months ago on awe, but he has been studying awe for years. And really beautiful work in looking at the power and impact of awe. Some of his research, he'll bring, again, groups of people who are not normally in an environment with a lot of access to nature and bring them into an environment with nature for just a week and look at their brain scans, look at their physiology, look at their immunology, and finding that this exposure to the natural world, that he thinks there's a special part of it that includes awe. So again, it's really nice to go have a picnic on the Hampstead Heath. I'll bring up British examples here, though probably not this time of year, but really nice in the spring and summer, right, to be out and having a picnic. But the awe, it's a specific ingredients with awe. With awe, it's really interesting. There's almost part of it that can sometimes feel a little bit like fear or even horror. There's like a wow, it is huge. And what's so interesting about awe is it really helps us recognize our sense of space and place. We're this little thing, and there's this huge thing, and we're just this little thing. And it can make people feel afraid, but more often it makes people feel humble. Not a lot of research on humility. There should be a lot more, but I think we see that both with gratitude and awe, that humility is one of the kind of byproducts. And humility being a sense of recognizing that, not only are we not really in control, but that we are the recipient of amazing gifts. Not like, oh, I'm grateful, like, thank you for giving me a sandwich that I paid for. I feel gratitude. Like that's a transactional gratitude. The humble receiving of a gift is recognizing in some ways you didn't do anything to deserve it. You're just receiving it. There's such an interesting, different psychological stance, that sense of how we connect with awe. And I think there's a really nice relationship between awe and gratitude and empathetic joy. So I'll just spend a little time kind of unpacking those. When we think about, empathetic joy, it's this rejoicing with the virtues and goodness of others. We often relegate that to the human world. We think about the goodness of people who we know, right? We think about people who use their power and privilege to do great things in the world. So I feel enormous empathetic joy for David Attenborough. I'll just once again, and his desire to keep helping this world. I think he's into his 90s and just really committed and dedicated. And so I can feel my heart lifted up by the goodness of others. I feel like empathetic joy, especially in the contemporary secular mindfulness world, it's underappreciated. It's such a powerful tool, such a powerful practice when we can feel that, especially that sense of despair. Like our heart is just so heavy with everything that's wrong. And I think even, Victoria's example of looking out the window at the birds, that's a rejoicing with what's good. And I think we should actually extend our rejoicing to the more than human world. I mean, I feel great rejoicing with a lot of the trees that I've grown up with in this area here. I see them, many of them have been, full grown trees since I was little. And so I've gotten slightly bigger, they've stayed enormous, and yet I feel like a real rejoicing in their seasons. Maybe they're losing leaves or they're regaining their buds. And just that sense of the goodness, really, just the beauty, the natural goodness, but not a superficial level, right? Not just like, oh, that's pretty, I like it, it serves me. It's a real rejoicing, like, wow, that's probably, I'm looking out my window now, that's probably a 150-year-old tree. Wow, like how many nutrients that has really gotten into the dirt. And I know that it hosts like a family of woodpeckers. I've seen it go through huge storms, that real sense of appreciation and rejoicing with. And it's interesting. I've had this conversation with a number of colleagues in the contemplative science world. There's a lot of like kind of similarity between a sense of rejoicing and gratitude, but they're not exactly the same. Our sense of gratitude, it really can be for just about anything. And our sense of gratitude can definitely have that quality of feeling good with an other, but it can also just be a sense of, gratitude for something in our own daily life that's just so mundane and so simple. I'd love to hear from folks in the chat or otherwise, any examples of when you have experienced empathetic joy or when you've experienced gratitude. Let's just take in the last week. We're not always looking out for this, so it's a good exercise, to use our retrospective awareness. What has made us feel empathetically joyful, lifted with the virtue of others and in the more than human world? And what has made us feel grateful? A deep sense of appreciation for receiving. Snowdrops. Wow, in the woods. That sounds beautiful. And also very curious, this difference between empathetic joy and gratitude. Tom is saying that we've had a rather cold streak and it warmed up recently, and the squirrels came out and have been running around chasing each other and having fun. Yes, that is so wonderful, right? And we can feel grateful, right, for the warmth and maybe the empathetic joy of like just the squirrelness. Some of my favorite animals myself. Yeah, and Vanessa recognizing the blue jay is back. And Jeff says, seeing rescued animals frolic outdoors brings great empathetic joy. Yeah. And Judas is mentioning that a plant that produces its fruit unconditionally, and that fruit gives us life. Yeah, it's really again into this book, Old Path, White Clouds. In the very first teaching, according to this book, that the Buddha gives to the gathered village children after the night of his awakening, one of the things he mentions is bringing mindfulness to eating. And many of you who know Thich Nhat Hanh's work know that he really loved bringing in mindful eating as such a big part of his practices on retreat and their centers where he was. And, it's not just, this tastes good. Nice texture. Good aroma. it's really recognizing, as Judith is pointing out, all of the generosity that we're eating, right? That literally all of the generosity that has gone into what's on our plate. And what a sweet way to enhance our experience of eating was with that sense of generosity that, yeah, maybe we bought it in the store, but that so much care had to be taken in order for that to, coming up from the earth, reaching the sun, being picked, being transported so gently. I think that's a beautiful way of bringing gratitude, is through our food. I'm sure it is better for our digestion as well. um, and then David says, playing footy with grandson, very sweet. Yes. And Hema is saying here, Hema, the new generation of young doctors bringing perspectives and changes at work brings a sense of joy. Oh, how wonderful. Yeah. So just rejoicing in kind of new ideas, new points of view. Friends going to Thailand and seeing incredible pristine islands there and kindly sharing the pictures. Great example, because this is where we see the superpower of empathetic joy to break down the prison walls of jealousy, envy, right? we could see something beautiful, especially photos that someone is sharing with us, and just have a sense of, why not me? It's so difficult to feel that. And yet with the empathetic joy, we're released. We can feel a rejoicing with instead of a comparison. Very powerful practice for social media. So, yeah, thanks for sharing those. And then with awe, a little bit different again. I think different quality, different scope than gratitude and empathetic joy. There's a beautiful line from some of the transcendentalists in the United States who were writing about a love of nature. And one of them is John Muir. And it's essentially describing how we can see the entire universe in a single drop of a raindrop. And that real sense of awe that every aspect of the natural world actually can invite us into seeing the entire world. And I think it's so beautiful. It has a lot of resonance with a Buddhist seeing of every single thing containing every single thing, right? Every small thing. And with awe, I mentioned, of course, it's very easy to experience awe, specifically in locations where there's a lot of vastness, canyons, open skies, and some of the research on awe. It supposes that the reason, we like awe, that there's a good feeling for it, it actually helps, our ancestors find places to build villages where there's large open spaces. That's kind of a desired aesthetic aspect. And that's really good for then being able to see who's coming towards you. So awe has that other purpose too. And I think with awe, we can, of course, see it in these grand, vast landscapes, but we can also see it in if we look at almost any natural thing, our own fingerprint, a single leaf, right? So very much on the night of Buddha's awakening, we're really staring deeply into the pipala leaf and recognizing all of everything that has gone into that leaf, and that leaf is timeless, that leaf is clouds, that leaf is sun, that leaf is wind, that we can actually experience awe by looking deeply at anything in nature for long enough. Such a beautiful, beautiful way of engaging with our attention instead of kind of passing by quickly. So I think there are these inevitable awe experiences. We come out onto this huge vista or meadow, but then there's a cultivated awe experience. And yeah, Victoria shared this here, to see a world in a grain of sand, heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. Beautiful, by William Blake. And it's a choice we make to cultivate awe and to really have that sense come alive. Any of you who have had children or grandchildren know that it is our natural state. There is a phase in life when awe is everything, right? Everything we experience, like, wow. And it's such an amazing kind of portal. Of course, we couldn't really move through the world that way, and anyone trying to kind of corral toddlers around could find that challenge and difficulty very hard if all we were experiencing is awe. And yet, it's probably for most of us an area that we could increase, right? If we're thinking about what are the daily ingredients or weekly ingredients for our well-being, awe is one that most of us could increase, as is play, but that's a whole other topic for another time. Play is another key ingredient to our well-being. So yeah, I think it's yeah, such a wonderful topic. The other portals to awe that are quite well known are birth, death, and music. And I think it's quite interesting for those of you who've witnessed either the beginning or end of a life. Indeed, right? It's just incredible to witness just this very basic but profound reality. And those of us in the helping professions who might have a closer kind of daily experience of that, there's a lot of awe every day. And then music. Quite wonderful that, we have co-evolved with music. It's, ethnomusicologists will kind of probably date music back to the earliest of human experiences, and that we can create this experience of awe through music, part of ritual, part of connection, just building community. And I'm going to invite us in a moment to do a practice. Essentially, we're going to move a bit from a rejoicing practice to awe as a felt experience. Awe is not one of the four measurables, so we're going to have to kind of go out on our own new territory here. But definitely, usually awe is not something we meditate upon, but we kind of experience in the natural world. But together, we're going to do that intentional cultivation of awe. Karine saying that felt awe and a moment of sensing the wind in her face and the light of the sun and enjoying that spring is coming. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I hope again that in talking about gratitude, rejoicing, awe, that you are starting to feel a bit of that and kind of get a sense of that. So let's take a moment here and again, find a meditation position. We've been sitting for a while, so feel free to move around a bit. Give your arms a nice stretch. And roll the neck and shoulders. And then find a nice posture for your meditation. And once again, reconnecting to a sense of our feet on the ground. And feeling the support of the earth beneath you. And feeling a sense of spaciousness all around you. Imagining the sky above. And invoking that beautiful instruction by Thich Nhat Hanh of feeling a sense of an inner smile, a smile across the heart. And softening through the eyes and the chest and the belly. And then gently shifting our attention and awareness to the mind and imagination. And bringing to mind a time in the last week when we observed some kindness. Maybe this was kindness between people in our own household or friends. Maybe this was kindness we witnessed at work, school, or even among strangers. This could be kindness we read about in the news. See if you can recall some time in the last week or two when you observed or read about kindness. Really bring the details of that vividly to mind. And again, noticing if there are sensations in the body that might shift or open as we bring this memory to mind. And gently releasing that memory or image. And we shift to another opportunity for visualization, imagination. Bringing to mind a time in the last week or two when we felt a sense of rejoicing from the natural world. Could be something very simple, maybe the way shadows or sunlight was showing up through a window. Maybe the squirrels chasing each other around. Maybe even a first flower of spring. Taking a moment and seeing if you can really bring forth one memory or image, really recalling the sensory experience of taking in this beauty, this wonder of the natural world. And as we remember and recall this sense of beauty, a sense of rejoicing with the natural world, keep noting and noticing sensations through the body. And then shifting and releasing this memory, bringing to mind something that could have happened any time in our life in which we experienced awe, just a sense of the vastness This could be a huge starry night sky, beautiful waterfall, maybe a rich, dense jungle, maybe an incredibly beautiful musical experience. This, of course, can happen in our spiritual practice as well. Taking a moment and bringing a memory of awe just vividly to mind. And really feel as though you are saturating the mind, heart, and body with this remembered image. Notice and feel sensations that might arise as we evoke this image. Make it real. Gently release the image and just continue noticing and feeling any sensations in the body, the residue of this enjoyable emotional experience. See if you can just savor by being in the body and with the breath. Thank you for your practice. So yeah, I would be very curious from folks. Was that different than the handshake practice? What felt different in the body? Yes, Victoria.
Am I unmuted? Okay. It felt, for me, it felt very spacious and kind of an opening up and then an opening up beyond that and beyond that, sort of spreading out into space. And in contrast to the handshake, which felt, for me, felt more like a struggle in a way. It was more of a sense of a desire to contract, but the sort of the will to expand, if you know what I mean. So it felt there was a little bit more kind of back and forth with the handshake, and this felt very, very sort of naturally expansive, like with no effort, just kind of like resting in the spaciousness.
Thank you. Very glad to hear that. And yeah, it's undeniable that our emotions are different in how we feel them. And I have, one of my life, I won't say battles, but life paths is really trying to encourage that we don't talk about emotions as negative or positive, since they can really, all of them are generative and important, but that we can talk about them as constructive or destructive. And yet, there's no denying that some of them feel better than the others. So we can call them, some emotions are difficult, some emotions are easier. And it's so powerful that our memory can evoke emotion. We often think of emotions as happening out there, like something out there is happening, I have an emotion. But if we start to pay attention, so many of our emotions are triggered internally by thoughts, memories, and images. And so, how do we work with that incredible amount of material that's coming up? And it's so wonderful to have the opportunity to kind of build resilience as we can with handshake, and then savor. So, for some folks, maybe what they brought up in their meditation were images or ideas, especially in thinking about kindness and rejoicing, that maybe you wouldn't think about. Maybe like, oh, if we hadn't done a meditation, I probably would have forgotten about that. It can often happen with our practices. And yet, when we bring it to mind, when we savor it, it can help it encode into our memory, it becomes a bigger part of our reference material, right? What we're operating from on an everyday basis is our accumulated memories and ideas. That's how we perceive the world. So if we're including and really resonating with what is good and savoring, we can shift, in fact, like our resting perspective. Very powerful. I hear from others here that, yeah, like spacious and lighter and uplifting, harder to go back to specific experiences for one person here. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I think that's why I really like, especially with practices where we're going to use memory, to either give yourself a moment to think of it again, whether it's like a difficult or hard experience, or if it's a good experience. Maybe you want to do a little journaling before you meditate, or you can use your photos to help you remember. The kindness that came up for me was actually between my partner and one of our cats, and that just brought that full experience of, oh, it's so sweet. And right, and so if we can get that real clear memory, it can really trigger that emotion quite quickly. I think the real trick is, or not trick, but the real challenge probably, how do we work with both of these sets of experiences? How do we really try to hold both and not give ourselves so much preference to the feeling good? Not because feeling good is in any way bad or prohibited. It's not. Feeling good is good. Feeling good helps us. Feeling good is motivating. Feeling good makes us feel connected to others. However, I think sometimes we can experience, especially in our contemporary culture, is a toxic positivity, an inability to tolerate things that feel bad, a desire to just get rid of everything that feels bad and focus on what feels good. Not only does that not work, right, and is the definition of samsara, right, trying to avoid what feels bad and seek what feels good and find ourselves constantly chasing, we really miss out on what is hard. And the richness of a handshake practice can really help us, make space and make time and meet with those difficult emotions, which again, they have really important messages for us. And they're part of our natural human functioning. They're part of what makes us human. And when we try to just avoid them or deny them or distract away from them, we end up actually getting a little dissociated. So when we're trying to deny or avoid what feels bad, we also are denying and avoiding what feels good. We can't just do one. We end up kind of like just tamping down our full experience. And again, it's a very delicate balance of not wanting to overindulge in what feels bad. Maybe like some of you here really like feeling sad, actually. I get kind of comforted in feeling sad and kind of hang out there for a while. But I don't want to spend too much time there, right? So it's this incredible balancing act. And it's interesting because I think in contemporary psychology, not contemplative science, but contemporary just psychology, it really does feel like the solution to our emotion issues is down regulating what feels bad, up regulating what feels good. And so we're constantly in that seesaw. And what contemplative science offers us is equanimity, being able to hold both as much as possible without so much preference. But I think it's really just enough. We can still realize, yeah, I really preferred that practice where it felt good to the practice where it felt bad. And I see that both are needed. And I see that both matter. And in fact, it's interesting. It's a good thought experiment. If you could get rid of every difficult emotion, what would your life be like? Unsafe, for one, right? We need fear to protect us. It would be really hard for us to know what truly mattered to us if we didn't experience loss, right? If we didn't feel anger, we would also be, unable to see clearly when things were in the way or unjust. So I think it's really helpful for us to look closely. I see this question from David, the difference between emotion and a feeling. So a feeling is a more, I would say, kind of, it's a word that we use colloquially, like in conversation, and it means a lot of things. Feeling can be sensation, like my hand feels warm. Feeling can be a way people describe emotion, like I feel blue or sad. Emotion is a discrete term for something which has a trigger, an experience, and a response. That's how we differentiate, generally speaking. And feeling can also be our feeling tone. I feel kind of pleasant or unpleasant. So a little less specific. But also, of course, again, colloquially, people will say, like, how do you feel? And they're asking about what's your emotional state or mood. Yeah, I know we are wrapping up here, but I'd like us to do just a really quick, not really quick, as in a rush, but really quick, just a check-in practice. Closing your eyes if that feels good. Otherwise, you can keep them open. And seeing if you can really connect both practices that we did. Almost imagining as though in your right hand, you were holding that feeling of the heaviness for the handshake practice. And in your left hand, you were holding that lightness of awe and joy. Feeling that while those both experiences can be true, the greater being, the greater body, the consciousness and awareness, both can exist. There's space around them. You can bring your attention back and forth, noticing what it's like to attend to the difficulty and the heavy, what it's like to attend to the light and the spacious, and what it's like to lean back between both. And then gently bringing the hands back and just folding them in your lap or wherever feels comfortable. And reconnecting to the body, to the breath, and considering a prospective intention. If there's anything that from our time here together today feels like a guiding light or an idea, a curiosity, something you'd like to carry forward for maybe the next day or so, just keep it in mind. Very gently wiggling fingers and toes, blinking eyes back open together. Very amazing how the time flies. Really wonderful to be with you all. And yeah, if folks feel open to sharing their intention in the chat, it'd be great to make that known and can help us be motivated to bear this in mind for a couple days. And otherwise, yeah, I really want to thank you, Tempa and CCN. Really great to be with you all. Great to be with the Sangha. And leave a couple minutes if there's any questions or other comments. Or yeah, Tempa, I don't know if there's announcements for folks you have here.
Well, on behalf of CCN, we just wanted to offer a deep bow of gratitude to all the participants, all those who have made offerings for this session, but especially, of course, to our dear Dr. Ekman. We are very much hoping to hold more sessions of this nature in the future, and we're very deeply grateful for this one, which will undoubtedly bring a lot of benefit to people who watch the recording and keep returning to the recording. And we just want to invite everyone to share this recording with your friends, relatives, loved ones, colleagues, if you think there's anything that might be interesting for them, so that we can share and spread this work and the good news of cultivating emotional balance and eco-dharma.